what I would like to start off with is basically a brief outline of how this webinar is going to work. So we're here to talk about how meaningful relationships can build human agency and social inclusion. And I am very pleased to be joined by Adam Pagett from Bradford Council, by Lotte Harbo from VIA University College, and by Daniela Reimer from Zurich University of Applied Sciences. We're basically using the fishbowl method to explore this. We'll start off with a poem by Adam. I'll give a bit of an outline of recognition theory, and then we'll have a little discussion with Adam and Daniela and Lotte before we use the rest of the time to kind of explore those thoughts a bit more widely with all of you. So feel free at this point to contribute with your own thoughts, ideas, experiences around recognition. And towards the end, we'd like to draw out the key learning points for practice. So if that sounds exciting enough, then I will just hand over to Adam now to share this with you.
Okay.
Adam, are you there?
I'm not the man I used to be. I had a home, a wife, a family, a job, a purpose, vitality. I was a respected pillar of the community. Now all I have are the streets where I sleep, my bed that's walked upon by 1,000 feet, in England's not so green and pleasant land. A look of pity, disgust, avoidance, the odd smile received from people rushing on by. I hear the constant judgments in their head. He's just after drug money, he'll end up dead. I sit here anonymous, a man with no name, feelings of worthlessness, sorrow and shame, in England's not so green and pleasant land. All I want is a place to stay, enough to eat, to live in a society where the elderly walk safely down the street, where they do not have to choose whether to eat, or sell their possessions just to make ends meet, in England's not so green and pleasant land. I want to be treated with dignity and respect, not walked on by as if I'm hidden out of sight. You insist it's because of the choices I made, when really I was not cared for from the cradle to the grave, in England's not so green and pleasant land.
Thanks very much, Adam. That's really powerful stuff. And I think it really shows very much what it feels like to experience the lack of recognition, and how unnecessary some of it really is, or most of it really is, and what it would take for us to treat each other as human beings with human dignity. And I think recognition theory can really help us kind of keep that at the forefront of not just our practice, but the way we lead our lives. To begin with, just to say that recognition theory has been developed by Axel Honneth, who is a German academic. He's part of the Frankfurt School, and there's a whole load that I could say, but I won't. But in essence, he suggests that human development can only be achieved intersubjectively through recognition. So it is in relationship and through relationship that we experience what it means to be confirmed as a human being, to feel recognized as a whole person. He talks about the importance of relationships for individuals so that people can develop a secure sense of self, that they get a sense of their own agency, and that we can learn, that we can contribute and influence wider society. And I think the important bit that he suggests is that we all pursue recognition. What we do is aimed at gaining recognition from other people, or we experience a struggle for recognition when we feel like actually we are not recognized as human beings. So as social pedagogues, I think the argument is that we need to place recognition at the heart of relationship-centered practice, because it enables us to engage with people as human beings, as equals. We're all looking for recognition. Importantly, Honneth suggests that there are different levels in that 3 forms of self-relation, and that we gain self-confidence if we experience recognition through the relationships we have through friendship and love, and that experience of friendship and love. That enables us as individuals to develop a sense of uniqueness, a sense of our own identity, and to experience that we are actually deserving of love and emotional engagement. So what that brings out is self-confidence. Self-respect comes from the recognition when our moral and legal rights are bestowed on us. So when others have sufficient respect for us to recognize our right to have autonomy, to have dignity, and to be our own person, our own agent, and that without rights, there's no respect. So we can see that in the struggle for legal rights for particular groups, for instance, and why that is important, so that you're not just at the mercy of other people's willingness to show you recognition, but actually it's enshrined in law. And the third level, third aspect is self-esteem, which comes from recognition when we feel like our abilities, our traits are recognized as being of genuine use to the community we're part of, or society we're part of. So we're able to contribute to the community and to genuinely connect with others in society, to experience a sense of meaningful belonging, a sense of loyalty and solidarity. That's the bit that gives us self-esteem. So in effect, those are the 3 levels. And I think it's really interesting to kind of look at the way we develop relationships in social pedagogical practice, not just in terms of the one-to-one relationships that we might have with the people we support, which are crucial because it's an opportunity to nurture their sense of recognition and build their self-confidence, but also to look at the structural aspects of our practice. So in which ways can we make sure that there's also recognition of moral and legal rights for the people we support, so that they can enjoy a greater sense of self-respect, as well as we also need to look at what can we do to promote social inclusion, to make sure that people are part of the wider community and enjoy a sense of recognition that builds their self-esteem. So those are in effect the 3 aspects that I think we'd like to focus on in our webinar in particular. So I will stop the screen share and introduce you to my former colleague, Lotte Harbo, from VIA University College, who's joining us from Aarhus in Denmark. And she's a researcher and has some really interesting projects that she's part of and that very much relate to recognition. So welcome, Lotte. I'll hand over to you then.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm first, Adam, thank you for that poem. It just struck me. I'm a trained social pedagogue and have other educations, and now I'm a researcher, and I do continuing education with people who are mostly trained social pedagogues. And what I want to sort of, when I was asked to participate here, thank you for that, Gabriel, I thought, okay, so one of these research projects that I'm part of right now is a participatory research project where me and a colleague, we were invited in by a project that aimed to help formerly homeless people to build their own tiny houses, you know, these little 14, 18 square meter houses that you can move around. And they were invited into this project. Actually, they were headhunted into this project to build their own houses and to try and create possibilities to actually live with their own houses in a community in a city or in Denmark. And this project was just aired with a lot of engagement and positivity and a sense of recognition from the residents to begin with. And when we are invited into the project by the project staff members, there's a sort of lack of communication between the residents and the staff members. And we are invited in. We are given one of the houses that's sort of owned by the project, but the resident that lived there has moved out. And we had a bit of considerations, because if we're not invited by the residents, why would we be allowed there as researchers? But we thought to ourselves, okay, right now there's a lack of communication between staff members and residents. So we'll try and see if there's a possibility that we might engage in dialogue and hear if the residents would want us to be there. And we actually stayed there. We were there like 1 day a week for 3 months, and there was just nothing happening on this sort of, on the grounds where the tiny houses were. There are 6 houses. And then one day, my colleague sees one of the residents who's out polishing his windows, and she sort of approaches him and says, "So hi, and how are things?" And they get into a small talk, and she says to him, "So is this burden, is it a gift, or sort of this house, is it a gift or a burden?" And he looks at her and he says, "Okay, now I'll talk to you, put the kettle on and I'll be over." And then actually we had like half a year where it was sort of a strict rhythm that we met up with them for a cup of coffee 1 day a week. And that allowed us an insight into how do the residents actually perceive help as it is thought in this project. And when I was asked and invited into this seminar, this webinar, I thought, okay, so in the project, there's a very brilliant example on how, if people that social pedagogy is supposed to help do not see it as help and do not feel recognized by help. And, you know, the project ran up until December last year, and there was a quite strong focus on, so where do they go with their houses when the project ends? Because this is a local authority ground, and how is the sort of legal arrangement and all sorts around the housing or the houses staying there? And the staff members engaged in negotiations with the local authorities on the contract with the aim of prolonging the project. And the residents, of course, wished to participate, but the staff members said, you can't participate in negotiations with the local authorities because the local authorities will not be able to handle people like you and the way that you might engage in the negotiations. So in a Honneth analysis, I think this is quite a fine example of a lack of recognition when it comes to the legal sphere. You know, all the rights that you actually have as an individual, they would be responsible, the residents, for this contract. And it might, you know, in Denmark we have a horrendous taxing system. It might infect all their sort of possibilities for actually earn money and pay taxes and all sorts, this contract, depending on how it's shaped and formed. But also it's an example of a lack of recognition in the social sphere, because the residents just felt as if they were not seen as residents that were actually sort of, could carry themselves with esteem in our society. And one member, or sort of one resident, said to me, and I just had that thought when you read your poem, Adam, that, you know, when you're homeless, you feel like a sort of a citizen that's only, you know, secondary to everybody else. And now in this project, they actually felt that sort of reproduced. They felt second to all the other participants. And my sort of end note on this little bit of the research is that we have a problem as social pedagogues if the people that we aim to help do not feel recognized by the help. But actually in Denmark we translate the lack of recognition to a sense of sort of being offended. So if we offend people with what's supposed to help them, then we need to think. Yeah, that's me.
Thanks very much, Lotte. That's really fascinating. And it really shows that we need to think about relationships in more dimensions than just about the one-to-one relationships. And whilst we might have really great intentions and see some success in what we do, if we don't pay attention to those other relationships and the other forms of recognition, then we can really fail, even though we're working so hard. So thanks very much. I'm wondering, Adam, if I can come back to you now at this point, because I'm really interested. You've just recently been on a course that we did on developing relationship-centered practice, and in your experience as a newly qualified social worker, why do you think recognition is a helpful perspective?
I think it sort of leans on what Lotte said. And from a personal point of view, if you feel like you're a bystander in your own life and you're not included, you feel like you've still no control. So things have not got better. You need to be seen as valued as a person in every way, from the input you give, you know, that your views are considered and respected. You know, but like I said, people living on like sort of the outer echelons of society, and yet they're still regarded as being on the outer echelons of, like, say, the housing sort of project. You know, that they're more than just, you're looking at people as more than just a commodity of an object in a room. It's a living, breathing person with thoughts and feelings, what you need to listen to. And until you do that, people are going to see that they've got no part to play. And it's almost patronizing as well. They're not children, you know, like, say, mental capacity. We've all got the right to make unwise decisions. And the fact they're in that situation could be down to unwise decisions. But to take over their life as I'm the teacher, I know best, then they might as well live or be part of an institution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as an independent individual, I have the right to make unwise decisions, and I exercise that right on a pretty much daily basis. So why don't we extend that to the people we support as well, to make decisions where you might go later on like, yeah, that was tough, but I enjoyed it, or I've learned something from it. So yeah, absolutely, that's a really cool, really crucial point, and it just shows that lack of confidence, lack of recognition that we often have, and the repercussions, because as Lotte mentioned, it is all about how other people perceive our intentions. So thanks for that, Adam. I'm curious to hear a bit more from Daniela now, because I know that she's been doing really fascinating research and written an excellent paper together with Mark Smith and Claire Cameron on moving from attachment theory to recognition, particularly in residential childcare. So I wonder if we could perhaps start off there in terms of why do you feel that we need recognition as a perspective on how we conceptualize relationships?
I think we've talked about that before. Often in child and youth welfare, relationships are conceptualized in the terms of attachment theory. And that's a pretty narrow way to see relationships. And it's also a way that determines children as having problems, because many of these children who are in residential care or in foster care, they haven't experienced secure attachment, and so the way they behave is often explained by their insecure attachment. And I think it's a very problematic way to consider these children and their struggle for recognition, because they want to be recognized. And sometimes it's difficult for them to accept a one-to-one relationship that is very close, because they have had very difficult experience with that, but they still want to be recognized. They want to have rights, like also rights to participate. They want to experience love. And they also want to experience this mutual way of solidarity
Okay, I think Daniela's internet connection will hopefully come back in a moment. She was going to say solidarity, I'm pretty sure. And whilst we're waiting, what she said there just reminded, are you back up? No, there was a bit of a glitch.
Sorry, oh, there was something, sorry.
Yeah, we lost you when you were saying solidarity.
Sorry, okay, so I was almost finished.
Go on, please.
Yeah, so I think it's very helpful for us and for these children in residential care and in foster care that we do not bring back everything to a one-to-one relationship and consider it attachment, a trouble attachment, insecure attachment, and explore the behavior of the child as being problematic, but also consider it as a struggle for recognition and give the child this recognition on different levels.
Yeah. Absolutely. It just reminded me of a really fascinating example that an elderly foster carer once shared when we did a conference around love in a professional context. And she was talking about one of her foster sons, and she'd over her 70 odd years or so, she'd had lots of foster kids. And I'd always kind of emphasized that she and her husband loved them. And she was talking about how one foster son had apparently stolen a car when he was like 15 or 14 or so and driven it around the police station, which clearly was a daft idea. So he ended up in a cell, and she was able to visit him and just talk to him about, like, did you really have to go to these lengths to know that we love you? And it was that bit about he needed to know, he needed to have that recognition that even if he did something as daft and as illegal as that, that her love for him was unconditional. And that was just a really, really crucial moment in their relationship. So yeah, it's absolutely, I think, taking that perspective of recognition and what can we do to support kids, generally, not just kids, because I think that's the beauty of that theory, is that we can see childhood in that sense, and understand how infants relate to the world and their kind of the importance of recognition. But actually, it's a lifelong desire to pursue recognition. So what can we do to support kids as well as adults in their struggle for recognition? Is a much better question than to say, like, oh, you've probably stolen cars because you hang out with the wrong crowds, and that's probably because of your insecure attachment, and there's very little we can do because your attachment happened in early childhood, and that's kind of it. So I think having a perspective that enables us to look more at what we can do without pathologizing the people we support is really, really fundamental. Because otherwise, yeah, as Lotte's example shows, we're kind of on the losing side from the very first moment. I think there's also something interesting, and I want to get back to you in a moment, Daniela, about the fact that Honneth's theory both works at an individual level, in that it enables us to kind of better understand what kind of, what can we do to support people's recognition. But it also works in helping us to understand wider society and the struggle for recognition and the formation of social movements on the back of that. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Daniela, on how has the pandemic kind of impacted on recognition in particular, or from that perspective?
So I think it is not just on children that the pandemic had a lot of effects, but on the whole society. And I think there's a lot of all these kinds of recognition, they are kind of shifting, and they are also kind of troubled and a little bit complicated. For example, if we start with the recognition by rights, this has been really complicated in times of pandemic. The right for individual autonomy, which is central in our Western democracies, is right now replaced by the idea of solidarity, and also by a lot of restriction and limitations in the name of solidarity. And coming back to the biographical idea, I think limitations and restrictions in the name of solidarity, they can only be accepted by people who have a basic attitude of solidarity, and it can be assumed that they could also acquire these through recognition forms of love, for example. So if you have experienced love and recognition of love in your previous life, then being solidarity, sharing solidarity in this situation could be easier for you. And it's also about something like a basic confidence that these restrictions will end. That means also having some basic confidence in our democracy and also trusting in politicians. I know this can be very difficult right now, but this is, I think that's the precondition to accept these rights. And they have, of course, if you can do that or not, that has some sources, some roots in your biography. And also these rights, on the other hand, they differ in the pandemic situation for different people, who is allowed to work, who not, who can work from home, who has to work outside of the home. And of course, from an epidemiological point of view, that's not arbitrarily, but it has consequences for those who are affected. And there's right now a gap that should also interest us as social pedagogues, that those who are privileged tend to have better chances to protect themselves, like in the home office. And those who are less privileged and have less income, most of the time they cannot work at all, or they cannot work in the home office. And at the same time, also, the recognition by social valuation and mutual esteem has also changed. So many people are right now suffering from a lack of social valuation due to the reduced social contacts. In the pandemic situation, people, they are, a colleague of mine said, they are thrown back to themselves and on their domestic sphere. And I think the difference in our societies become abundantly clear. So the difference of the working situation, also the stability of work and income, but also the housing situation becomes very important right now. And it becomes also apparent who has resources to shape lives and who has fewer or not at all in this difficult situation. And I think this involves many biographically acquired resources. For example, knowing I'm a precious person, even if this is not constantly reflected on me. So even if nobody tells me, I still know that I'm a precious person. Or I can occupy myself with meaningful activities, even if I'm thrown back on myself and on the domestic sphere. So I have enough ideas to do something, and I'm not just bored on being at home. And also, of course, what is more important than ever before is, do I have positive relationships at home, and do I have supporting networks with whom I have close contacts and I maintain close contacts, even without constantly meeting each other, like in digital ways or on the telephone. And this becomes much more obvious right now. And I think that has a lot to do with the biographies. And many people we meet as social pedagogues and social workers, of course, they didn't have so much chances to acquire these biographical resources to do very well with the current situation. And of course, social valuation is also given in these times in different ways to different jobs. So for some jobs, the social valuation is withdrawn. Everything that has to deal with fun and entertainment, like jobs in culture, restaurants, cinema, they are suddenly no longer needed. And this is withdrawing recognition, but it's also threatening the existence of many. So the whole situation exacerbates social differences economically, but also in terms of lifestyle, social recognition, and personal fulfillment. And I think social pedagogy in the current situation has to see these inequalities, and from a point of view of recognition, it's also important to understand the way people try to cope with it in more or less successful ways.
Yeah, absolutely. There's loads to kind of reflect upon, but I think what this really shows is that recognition offers us a really helpful kind of perspective on how to better understand what's important to people, and what they might be struggling with, and how we can most meaningfully support them in ways that respect their human dignity and show them that we don't just do this job because we get paid, excellent amounts of money, which we don't. So that actually we show them we are there because we really care about them as human beings. And we want to build wider solidarity at times when people are struggling in lots of different ways. So thanks very much for that. I'm really curious to hear from everybody else, and actually thought that I'm going to abandon our usual style of running this webinar, and in order to kind of give you more opportunities for recognition, I'm going to put you into small breakout rooms for just 10 minutes so that you can, first of all, obviously, get to know a few people at least, and have a bit more of a conversation about what you've kind of drawn out, what you found interesting so far. Great, so I hope you had some interesting conversations in your breakout rooms. I'm very curious if anybody would like to share anything you've discussed, any thoughts, examples you had. Feel free to chip in.
I'll try and say something. We were obviously discussing, well, my idea behind it, one thing that stepped out for me from the recognition theory is how it's important to take on a strengths-based approach when working with individuals, rather than focusing on the behaviours and what's gone wrong. Looking at what they can do and recognising them as human beings and the importance of that. And we were discussing, obviously, because we're all obviously from the same university. I'm a year 2 social work student, and I said that for my first placement, I did advocacy, and from that I picked up quite a lot of important. I learned a lot. I was always one that maybe I wanted to help out or do too much for people, but sometimes you've got to take a step back to be able to listen to their voices, and from that's how you develop the right relationship with the people and ensure that their voice is heard, and obviously it benefits them in the long run. Yeah,
and it helps them increase their strength. Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks, Nicola.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Would anyone else like to chip in?
I can talk a bit for our group, and I'm sure Karen and Naomi can chip in. I think there were 2 things that were quite important, like talking about how when you want to help, that can so easily and quickly descend into paternalistic, and actually putting yourself in a position of help is probably being very, very critical around that. That's one thing. And then Naomi talking about how she, as a sociologist, she finds it really interesting and kind of wonders why in social work attachment theory has got such a strong hold. And I found it quite nice to hear, because I think, how do you shift from using attachment theory to other theory would be interesting. So yeah,
absolutely. And you are allowed to use more than one theory as well. I think, that's very, very often we think that attachment theory is the only show in town, and I think that's when things become problematic. Because it doesn't help us to see things from as many perspectives as possible.
Excuse me, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
It's just, that's quite funny to hear, because then I wouldn't really call it social pedagogy. If you only use one theory, because how can you then address all the problems that social pedagogy is supposed to address? It's just a thought.
Yeah, absolutely.
But can I also say something on that? Sorry. Because to me, what's really, really interesting is that what's the basis, I think, like, there are theories and models. So like if you use Honneth's theory of recognition as just those 3 things, as the kind of like the solidarity, self-confidence and whatever. To me, it's not the theory, because it doesn't look into the kind of philosophical assumption around what do we think about a human being, society. And I think then that like comparing all those things is really, really important. And I would like to kind of go a bit further into that, but maybe it's not the today, but I think I want to go further there.
Yeah, Lotte is your person.
Can I just say as well, I mean, can I just say, not that we're going to get stuck on attachment theory, but I think this is symptomatic of social work here in the UK, is that something becomes the big thing. And so attachment theory was like pushed as the big theory that we all need to use. And that's because here we want an answer, and there are no answers. And we need to, and I think this is why recognition is so important, because you know, what we find is, if you think about, so attachment theory is interesting to think about, but what happens is it places the onus on the child and the young person or the adult, instead of this social pedagogy and the theory of recognition, pedagogy of recognition, shows that actually we have a part in this as well, and that there is this connection between us, and that we do work. I love your phrase, Lotte, tension fields, that we're working in these tension fields of everyday life, whereas attachment theory has allowed or encouraged British social workers just to put the onus on. It's somebody else's fault. They had a bad upbringing. This is just something we have to deal with.
Well, it's sort of, I'm thinking as well, like Lois said there, and Daniela, that the person what's stealing cars, is it because of the attachment? But really, like social pedagogy, are we not looking at it where really it's that they've got that sense of belonging and acceptance to a group, you know, and they're also developing their own social identity outside of the mainstream of society rather than attachment. You know, society can be seen as such an unfeeling thing where people are actually locked out of it and they don't know how to get back in, and the restraints of like poverty prevents them being able to rejoin, because it's quite uncaring, and it's about being able to make that connection to welcome somebody back into the fold of a mainstream society.
Yeah, absolutely, Adam. I think that's a really crucial point, because we've ended up with a meritocratic system where we think that people's success, people's achievements are a reflection of their hard work and their talents, and therefore they deserve all the riches that they gain from it. And by default, that means that if you are less fortunate, then you kind of deserve the fact because you're less talented, or you've just not had as many opportunities. And I think we then also believe that if we just manage to level the playing field, if we just create equal opportunities, then we don't need to change the name of the game. Then we've achieved social equality. But actually, is it fair to say that somebody who has a lot of talent, somebody who has a good education, deserves a better life than somebody who doesn't? What do we take as a justification for that? So I think we really need to rethink, how can we live a life where everybody enjoys a sense of human dignity and recognition, and where we don't just try to create equal opportunities, but where we try to create equal quality of life in ways that will look very different for different people, but where everybody has the right to flourish and to thrive in whichever way makes them happy and contribute to wider society. Because at the end of the day, we all have that need for recognition, and that also includes the importance of contributing to society in whichever way that might look. Right. There was also another point that I just wanted to amplify, and we talked about it a little bit in our group, Fiona, which was around kind of what happens when as society we kind of fail to provide recognition or to give recognition to people who are at the margins. Fiona, I wonder if you want to just share a bit about that.
So we were talking about my role, which is within child exploitation. And one of the things that jumped out at me was that one of the things that groomers and gangs both are doing are providing recognition to young people that are maybe not getting it anywhere else. So what you've got there is you've got a sense of not having your own recognition, but that recognition being provided by the groom or the gang. So for me, as I come in to try and support a young person to make sense of the situation that they're in, or they've been in, or they're at risk of falling into, my turning up just an hour a week to have a chat that isn't going to tip that balance for that young person. And so we were just talking briefly about, right, so how can I, within a limited time frame, work to tip that balance, so that young person is able to get their recognition without the risk to them. So, and we talked a bit about, you know, for a lot of us, we are getting our recognition for a lot of places. You know, number one, we're involved in this for a start, so we're getting recognition just by being here, but we're also part of jobs and education that are all providing some recognition. So it's that, you know, where can I support my young people to get their recognition from?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the next step.
Fiona, I think you know, it is that I think, like you say, this is that moral dilemma that we're constantly dealing with, aren't we? About like, how do we help somebody? And I think it's in your relationships. And I think sometimes we focus too much on the amount of time we have with people, when actually it's about what do you do with the time that you've got, and how are you helping build up somebody's self-confidence. You know, I remember when I was a social worker working with a young person, and she'd gone through a particularly awful time, and I remember being really honest with her about, you know, I'm really worried about you, I really care about you, this is really upsetting. And you could see, like, she was like, what, you know, what do you mean? I'm not deserving of care or love or respect. And then and that really changed the dynamics of our relationship. And then over time, you know, it's helping somebody build up their self-worth, I think, sometimes.
Yeah.
It's almost like when you start working with somebody, as if somebody turns the egg timer, and you've got a set period of time to sort of make breakthroughs, build a relationship before they either leave care or you get replaced by somebody else. It's
yeah.
So
there are a lot of challenges, a lot of dilemmas that we face, and I hope that a deeper understanding of recognition can help us at least critically reflect on what we can do and how we are kind of connected as part of the wider system as well, and who we can work with to meaningfully support people. Now, I'm very mindful that it's coming up to 11 o'clock, and I would like to just take this opportunity to ask you all to post any key learning points from today, any kind of messages you're taking away, because we're trying to develop a bit more of a visualization of how the different key concepts of social pedagogy relate to each other, and what do people think are the central messages around it. So in the meantime, whilst you are doing that, hopefully just in the chat, I think Cecile's question here about what tools has social pedagogy to really tackle those very deep ideological criticisms, that is a really interesting question, absolutely. And I think my quick answer would be go join our international online conference from the 22nd to 24th of June, because the theme will be around creating hope in dystopia. So given that we have these really deep-rooted social issues that we're faced with that are just making, limiting what we can do in our practice quite substantially, what can we actually do to not lose hope and to create hope at a time when it feels like the world is getting darker? There'll be lots of really amazing things happening at that. It's 3 days. It is across lots of different time zones, so you'll have a chance to meet people from across the entire world. I'll send out further information about that, as well as any information about upcoming webinars of this series as well. And I hope that you'll all join us again on the, I want to say 27th of April for our webinar on haltone, which is going to be the next concept we'll be exploring. Nicole, who's in the call as well, just now will be joining us, as well as a few other people. So we'll have a great crowd of contributors, and then on the 26th of May we'll be running a webinar on life space as yet another really fascinating concept that we can use in social pedagogy. So hopefully throughout this entire series you'll feel more resourceful in terms of the tools that we have at our disposal, the perspectives we can use to better understand the complexity of people's lives and what we can do in dialogue with them to meaningfully support them in navigating those complexities. So thanks ever so much again for all your contributions, particularly to Adam and Lotte and Daniela for joining us, and thank you all for chipping in as well. It's been lovely again to see many of you and to meet new people as well. So thanks very much for joining us, and have a wonderful day.